everyone, and welcome to a new video interview for Jogonet Gaming News. Today we are joined by Brandt Iden, who is a Sportradar's U.S. Head of Government Affairs and a former Michigan state legislator who was key in helping legalize sports betting in the state. Brandt will be joining us to discuss how the sports betting landscape is changing and the states that have now also legalized sports gaming. Hello, Brandt. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be on with you.
So, sports betting is now legal in Maine after Governor Mills signed the sports betting bill into law earlier this month. Given your experience as a former legislator and expert in the matter, how would you describe this new law and which are its main pros and cons? And what would you say has changed in Maine for sports betting to finally become a reality?
Well, it's great to see this finally happen in Maine. Obviously, it's been a long time coming. This legislation was vetoed previously, and so now this is about the third year that the legislature's been working on it. And what they were able to do was come up with a piece of legislation that was very specific to the three tribes there. And so this was very important to the legislature and to the governor. Obviously, those tribes are compacted. They're big economic drivers in the state of Maine, and they wanted to make sure that they had, basically exclusive control over the marketplace. And that's the type of legislation that you see there. Now, this legislation would allow potentially these tribes to partner with some of the big commercial operator names that the FanDuels, the DraftKings, the MGM, Caesars, the list goes on and on and on. They'd have the ability to do that under this legislation while still at the same time giving them exclusivity over sports betting. This also allows for retail sports betting in the commercial market, I should say, for the racetracks that are already in Maine. So you will have retail sports betting there. You'll have mobile sports betting operated by the tribes. It should be very exciting. The next step will be for the state of Maine to start promulgating the rules to get mobile sports betting up and running. Now, we'll see how this goes. The director came out publicly with some comments that this may take a little while. That's to be understood. I mean, sometimes this happens. States got to work through some things, but as they looked at other states that have got similar legislation, like Michigan, for example, because of the large tribal presence that we have, perhaps this could get done a little bit more quickly, and we could see hopefully a launch in 2023 in Maine.
Okay, as you were saying, this is a law that calls for both retail and mobile sports betting with exclusivity of mobile gaming for the state's tribes. What do you expect the sports betting landscape to be once the market actually goes live? And what I would like to ask you is, could tribal exclusivity limit the potential of this market, or do you see it as the right move?
Well, each market is very different. I mean, when PASPA now we're 4 years after the market, after PASPA has been overturned, and the market in each state is very different, and it was set up that way. Gaming has always been states' rights, and so it's a states' rights issue. This wasn't about sports betting for the Supreme Court. This was about granting the states the ability to regulate this in the way that they deem appropriate. And that's what each state has done. So now with we're coming up on 35 jurisdictions with some sort of mobile betting or retail betting, you see 35 different sets of regulations. And that's going to happen. The state of Maine worked through this, the legislative body worked through this, and they determined that, this is the best way to go for them. That doesn't mean that model transitions over to what Massachusetts is going to do as they debate their legislation. So it is very different, and it will continue to be. I do believe that, Maine, for the most part, is a fairly small market, just over 1 million people in Maine. They're going to have a lot of options. This is going to provide 3 separate skins. Potentially, this is going to give the players there a lot of different markets to be able to bet in. And, hopefully that may put some pressure on Massachusetts now to legalize as well. Another state that folks in Massachusetts can go to bet in. So this may push that a little bit there in Massachusetts and push that debate as they continue their conversation throughout 2022.
So, we now also have Kansas, which has just legalized sports betting actually on Friday. So now there's also a law in place there. And we also have, for instance, Ohio, which is getting ready for launch with license applications beginning June. Do you see legislation in these 2 states as appropriate for a healthy development of an industry? And perhaps I would like to ask you, given you are an expert in this issue, What about some specific provisions, such as Kansas calling for taxes to lure pro sports teams to the state?
Yeah, well, let's talk about Kansas first, and then we can transition to Ohio for sure. You got a lot in the question there, so let's see what we can do there. Both very exciting markets. Obviously, as you mentioned, Kansas just passed legislation, and that's going to be exciting. I will tell you that the most interesting piece about that is what you mentioned, which is there's a 10% tax rate on sports betting in Kansas. Of that 10%, 80% of that money that the state collects will go into a specialized fund, which will be used to lure sports teams into the state. Now, professional sports teams. Currently, Kansas has a professional soccer team, but no other professional sports in the state. In Kansas City, being a border city between Kansas and Missouri, has got the Royals and they've got the Chiefs. So they've got football and they've got baseball, right? And obviously, Kansas would like to see one of those teams perhaps come over the border from Missouri into Kansas, into the Kansas City side. And so they thought about that. The legislature thought about that when they were crafting this legislation. Now, I don't really think at the end of the day that there's going to be enough in that pot, which would probably be around $8 million a year, is what fiscal agencies, saying that may be in there available. That probably won't be enough. I mean, these are big sports franchises. They're going to need to be lured with big dollars. But here's where I do think there's a game changer. In the Kansas legislation, professional sports teams would be allowed to partner with operators to put in a sports book. Now, if the Chiefs or the Royals may say, well, look, that's awfully enticing. It may not be this pot of money that's available to us, but we could go over the state line and we could build a book. And that is something that we may be interested in doing, putting an actual retail sports book in the stadium, which is something that we've seen in other states that have been grappling with legislation. They've been offering this now, right? And so this is an opportunity for those sports teams that are right on the border to be able to say, well, maybe this is enticing enough. Maybe it's not the money that's in that pot, but maybe what it is having the ability to build a sports book, right? So that may be very exciting. So I'm excited to see how that will shake out. I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion, and that we thought that may entice Missouri to get it done this year. Obviously, their legislative session is now over. They were unable to get it across the finish line. So Ohio is also going to be very exciting. Ohio is going to be a huge market. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of competition. They're provided for a lot of skins there. There's a lot of folks who can participate in the different tiered licenses, bars and restaurants. Taverns will be able to participate. They'll be able to do that in Kansas as well, but at a much smaller level. So Ohio will be a very big market, and we'll see how that plays out. Both low competitive tax rates, which make for, a competitive industry. In order for this industry to continue to flourish, we have to have competitive tax rates, a lot of competition, the right consumer protections. That's what's going to make this industry continue, upward in the upward trend that it's been on. And I think it will continue that way when you have states like Kansas and Ohio that are implementing good legislation.
And now, speaking in general terms, what is your assessment of how sports betting legalization has expanded this particular year thus far? And we have also Minnesota, which is making a last-minute push for legalization. What's your take on that?
Well, so I will say this: it's been a little bit slower than 2021. Obviously, that's just naturally, that's the way cycles go sometimes. In the legislative cycle, election years are sometimes a little bit slower. We're seeing that this year. 2022 is a big election year across the country, and because of that, sometimes the legislative activity slows a little bit. One of these issues is probably, gaming. That's just one of those issues that sometimes gets pushed to the back burner when states are dealing with budget and healthcare and COVID and all the education, all these other big issues that are out there right now that state legislative bodies have to deal with. And so with that, it's sort of to be anticipated. Now, you're right. We do have a few states that are still out there. We have Minnesota, which is making a last minute push. However, I'm going to speculate and say that probably will not make it through the Senate this year. It's just not a priority for the Senate in these remaining days that they have. They wrap up at the end of the month. I don't think that there's enough time for a negotiated deal to come to fruition there. Massachusetts, I think, still has a lot of potential. They go all year, which means that a deal could be done in Massachusetts all the way up to the end of 2022. So this could take us all the way through, potentially Thanksgiving, Christmas time. We could still see a deal in Massachusetts. Lots of time there. I also think today was the start of session in North Carolina. I think North Carolina, which has retail sports betting at the tribal casinos, they're pushing for mobile. I think North Carolina has got a great chance of being a mover this year, which would be great. Obviously, we've had Maine and Kansas. It'd be nice to be able to add North Carolina to that list. It's another state that's been talking about this for a long time. I think they finally have that legislation in a good spot, and I'd care to place a wager that North Carolina may get it done this year.
You played a key role in helping legalize sports betting in Michigan, which is a state that is now home to a healthy industry with 15 operators, good revenue figures. In your opinion, what conditions are key for a good sports betting industry? And what can you tell us in regards to how this state market is advancing?
Well, so let me focus on that first. Obviously, Michigan, my home state. I spent, the better part of my entire 6 years in the legislature working on this. It took me 5.5 years to get it done. I also had a veto, so I'm sympathetic to those folks in Maine that also had that. It happens, right? I will say this: the Michigan legislation, in my opinion, is fantastic model legislation for the rest of the country that has both a commercial and tribal component to it. We were able to integrate those and make it a very successful market. As you pointed out, in 2021, we had about $150 million in state revenue between iGaming and sports betting. We had it was a fantastic 2021 for us, and we're continuing to grow. So Michigan is a great market. What leads to that? And I mentioned that a little bit earlier when I was talking about Kansas and Ohio a little bit. It's about making a competitive market. You have to give plenty of consumer options available to the consumers. You have to keep tax rates low, and you have to make sure that you're providing for the proper consumer protections. The goal here is to obviously get folks who are playing offshore, to get them to come and play in state. We know that they exist. We know that they're playing on those illegal books offshore. We want them to play in state. And you can do that with a lot of options for them, giving them good lines, and you can do that with low tax rates. And that's what's able to do it. Then we protect those players by adding the proper level of responsible gaming initiatives and other, consumer protections to be able to protect those players who play. That's what created a great market in Michigan. We've seen that in a lot of other states. And that's, those are the types of key principles we like to model and we like to advocate for as we move into other states.
Well, another state that is also seeing perhaps a push for legalization is California, which has seen major operators joining efforts to qualify a sports betting measure for the November ballot. But polls indicate citizens are somewhat divided on this issue. We also have other gaming interests proposing alternatives. What do you think is what must happen in order to get all the stakeholders on board in a case like this one, in which you have a lot of different alternatives?
Well, California will be very interesting. So as you mentioned, currently we believe that there'll be two proposals on the ballot, one which is already qualified, the other which has put forth signatures and should likely qualify in July. And what that means is there'll be a proposal for retail only, and then there'll be a proposal for mobile. Now, these two proposals can work jointly with each other, and they were designed that way. So you could potentially have both initiatives pass, allowing for both retail and mobile in the state. Now, the problem is with all that is that the tribes have come out pretty forcefully against the mobile initiative. And because of that, there's a tremendous amount of money being poured into the initiative from both sides, both for and against. And so voters are turning on their televisions, they're reading the newspapers, they're on social media, and they're getting inundated with advertisements for and against, for and against, for and against. And that's going to happen all the way up until November now. This will likely be, in my prediction, probably the most money ever spent on a ballot initiative in the state of California. I believe and will predict now that this will be the largest of any, when you combine all the money being spent by all sides in this thing, it's going to be tremendous at the end of the day. Now, what that means, there'll be a ton of confusion in the marketplace. And oftentimes, unfortunately, when there's confusion, voters just have a tendency to vote no on the issues. They've heard lots of different things. They've been inundated with all this advertising. Sometimes it leads to frustration, and sometimes they just end up voting no, or they take a pass and they don't vote on the initiatives at all. Unfortunately, I could predict that both initiatives may fail in the state. That's typically what we've seen happen when there's competing initiatives. It'd be tough for the industry to see that happen because obviously California is a massive market. We'd love to see it come to fruition. I think it's going to be an uphill battle in California this year, but that's just how it's going to play out. And unfortunately, I think the stage is set and the battle royale is about to begin.
Now, I'm taking you to another state, Florida, which provides an example of a state where sports betting is off to a sort of complicated start. The market was legalized, a compact was in place between the state and the Seminole tribe, but it has now been paused due to a judge order. What do you think other states could learn from this situation? And well, I'm going to ask you for your prediction as well. What can we expect in regards to a new launch in the state?
Well, I'm glad I brought my crystal ball with me. Hopefully I can rub it for you and see, and I tell you what happens. I don't know. But here's what I will say. You're correct. So where we stand today is that the governor entered into a compact with the Seminole tribe, giving them full exclusivity in the state of Florida. That's Hard Rock casino folks. And because that compact does a lot, that compact not only provides sports betting and potentially iGaming, it allows table games, it allows for a lot of other social services. It's a massive compact in the state of Florida that provides for a lot of initiatives and a lot of things that the Seminole tribe has been looking for and negotiated with the governor. So based on that compact, the Seminole tribe launched last fall now, I guess it was fall of 2021. There was a launch in place. It was up for, if I recall, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. I forget my time frame now. The app was up for a very limited amount of time. And then immediately, due to court injunctions, was pulled down. And now, as you alluded to, there's a battle that is ensuing between basically now what's happened, some of the commercial folks and the parimutuel facilities there have now engaged with the U.S. Department of Interior. This will go to the Supreme Court. This will be hashed out at the Supreme Court level at this point in time. I envision originally that something may be done this summer. That's not going to happen now. I believe that this decision gets pushed off until likely maybe early 2023, late 2022. How that goes, it really lies in the court's hands. There's going to be obviously a lot of discussion and debate on that. What I can tell you is that I don't predict that we'll see anything in Florida until likely, unfortunately, 2024. And what that means, it's going to be a mix of what happens with the court decision. Then if one of those entities has to go to the ballot because it may be proven that they have to go to the ballot the following November, sports betting in Florida, unfortunately, may be a long ways off at this point in time. I was initially very optimistic and hoping that was going to be the case, that we may see it sooner. It doesn't look like it's going to happen now. So, I feel bad for a lot of my friends in Florida who are on that app early on and we're like, I can't bet anymore. No, can I go to the casino? No, you can't go in the casino either. So we're going to see what happens. It'll play out in the courts. It'll be a long road for Florida, though, unfortunately.
So, well, now to close this interview, I wanted to ask you about the general betting landscape in the United States, because we have seen it change a lot lately. Well, New York has now become the leader by adding mobile operations taxed at a high 51% rate. We are seeing other states now wanting to launch mobile operations as well, and considering tax rates which are high, although not as high as that one. Do you think that New York is perhaps setting a precedent for the industry, perhaps influencing other states? And how do you expect the industry in general to move forward now?
Sure. Well, I certainly hope not, is the answer to the question. At 51%, New York remains the highest in the country, and it just came out earlier in the week. I'm not sure if you saw this, but the MGM has now come out and said they don't see a path to profitability in the state currently under where things stand with the high taxes. So they're backing off on their marketing spend there. This was inevitable. I mean, the fact this was going to come eventually. This is not a model that the industry is looking to replicate. And I'll reiterate that at 51%, this is not a model the industry is looking to replicate. Now, the good news is that look at Kansas. Kansas passed this year. It didn't become part of the conversation. And why I mean didn't, tax rates, of course, were a part of the conversation. 51% was never a consideration in Kansas. And so I think that that's good news. I think that certainly states are looking to optimize taxes and bring in as much money as they can. I also think that they're beginning to recognize through, the industry stakeholders advocating and helping to educate them in the process, sports betting is a very low margin business. There's just not a tremendous amount of money there. And because of that, it cannot be taxed at a high level. And so you have to work through that. And that's certainly a conversation that I believe will continue in states that haven't opened up yet. And I actually believe states will go back and look at their tax rates and talk about whether or not they think that they need to increase them. It's incumbent upon the industry and those of us that are part of this every day to continue to educate our lawmakers and our folks that we know that are in the industry, in the legislative process, in saying, look, sports betting is a low margin industry. We need to work to keep those tax rates low. We need to work to keep it competitive. And together, we can all do that to make sure that this rocket ship continues to escalate forward and continue to go up, because it's headed there. This, sports betting is in a great place in the U.S., and I'll just cap it off by saying that I love where we're at. We've got a majority of the states now that have something in place. I believe we're going to get there with all the states eventually. These things will work themselves out, but we are going to be, and when I mean we, I mean the United States, is going to be a great market for sports betting. Certainly, we're well behind Europe. We've got a ways to go, but we're going to get there. And because of the technology and the folks involved in this industry, the U.S. is in a great place, and I'm very excited about it. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you very much for joining us, Brandt.